My mom is threatening not to attend my wedding after my golden child brother proposed to my fiancé. So I told her she can toss her invite in the trash because I won't beg her to be there. Mark was my mom's baby boy, and she didn't do much to try and hide it. If my sisters and I got gifts, they were for us to share, but my mom made it pretty clear that Mark's things were only for him, and we shouldn't touch them. When Mark would screw up, I'd get punished for not being a good role model and showing him the proper way to behave. For example, Mark went through a phase of breaking his toys, and I got the beating because obviously he learned that behavior from me. It was around this time that I started distancing myself from my brother. I got my first job when I turned 17 because I wanted to finally get my car and make money that they couldn't force me to give to Mark. I got my first car at 18 after all of my hard work. When Mark expressed wanting my parents to buy him his car, my mom came to me and told me to give him my car because he needed it more. When I refused, she threatened to kick me out. At the start of the new school year, I moved away from college and cut contact with them. Around the time I moved back, my sister told me they had been seeing a family therapist and my parents wanted to apologize for their treatment of us. I was hesitant but agreed as long as they would be genuine, and the reconciliation process started when I moved back home. Then I met Jen and I met at a bar when I moved back in October and hit it off well. She was easily the most beautiful and intelligent woman I ever met, and we met up a few times more before we made it official. I wasn't sure where my relationship with her was going or my relationship with my parents was going. Mostly I didn't want to mention my family because I was ready to cut contact again if needed. At dinner with my family, my parents asked to see pictures of my girlfriend, and they passed my phone around the table. Mark saw it and blew up, calling me a poop brother for dating his ex-girlfriend. He demanded I break it off with her, and I refused. When I asked Jen about it, she confirmed they dated and gave me the details about their breakup. They were only together for a month before he broke things off with her because he was bored of being in a relationship and never really wanted to settle down anyway. On Jen's birthday this year, I took her to a fancy dinner with our families and her closest friends to ask her to marry me. Mark flipped again and blew up about me proposing to her, which my sisters and I immediately shut down. Mark had been quiet about the whole thing for the last 2 months. I didn't see him much and figured he was in low contact with me, which I had no problem with. Then he invited me and Jen for a family dinner at his apartment with my parents and sisters. I thought it was weird, but my parents and sisters were also going, so we agreed to go. The dinner was nice, nothing too fancy, and we moved to the living room to talk. About 30 minutes in a normal conversation, Mark stood up and told us he had an announcement. He made a long speech about being happy to have his family around for his big moment, then got on one knee and pulled out this cheap ring while asking Jen to marry him. Jen was confused and uncomfortable. She demanded that he put it away and stand up. My dad tried to make a grab for Mark, but I got to him first and punched him. He said something like wanted to show me that Jen wasn't really into me and just wanted to get back at him. This is the last straw. Jen and I went home and decided to uninvite Mark. A few days later, my mom stopped by my house and said she wanted to discuss my wedding. She asked me why I was so adamant about Mark not coming. She said that I shouldn't be so insecure about Mark and Jen's previous relationship, and that uninviting him, as he said, that if I weren't going to re-invite Mark, then she would not be coming either because I'm ostracizing her son. I shrugged and told her that if that's what she wants, she can toss her invite in the trash because I won't beg her to be there. She asked me if I would be okay with her not attending, and I told her it wouldn't be the first time she missed an event because of Mark. She said I was being an for throwing her past mistakes in her face, and she stormed out. About 2 weeks after she decided not to attend the wedding, she stopped by and said she wanted to clear the air and talk about everything. She said she couldn't get over me not inviting her because of a simple mistake. I reminded her that his simple mistake was proposing to my fiancé with me sitting less than 3 feet away from him, and she said it was just a joke. Things got pretty heated up, and we were having a screaming match. Jen got up and started walking towards the door. My mom followed her, still screaming at her. By this point, she's yelling about her tearing our family apart. While Jen was unlocking the front door, my mom grabbed her hair and pulled her to the ground, still screaming. She hit her and tried to claw her face, and I dragged her off of her and threw her outside. She banged on the door for a few minutes while I made sure Jen was okay before she left and called the both of us repeatedly. When I was sure Jen was okay, I texted my mom and told her not to bother to reach. I texted my mom and told her not to bother reaching out again because we'd never speak to her again. Even though Jen doesn't want to pursue anything, it's not up to us to decide whether it goes further, but they would keep our preference in mind after that. I was shocked when my mom tried to corner me leaving my job and screamed at me about trying to ruin her life. She kept screaming that I was an awful son for trying to get her arrested over a small misunderstanding, and she didn't understand what she'd done to deserve being punished like this. I told her that she shouldn't have hit Jen if she didn't like being in legal trouble. She demanded that I tell the police to forget the report, which I refused. I told her what the officer said about it being out of my hands. I also told her that I would never forgive her for what she did to Jen and what she did to me and my sisters growing up. She started to say how I should move on like my sisters, but I cut her off and told her that she should take their forgiveness and move on because she would never receive it from me. After cutting ties with my mom, the weeks that followed were turbulent, but there was a sense of relief. Jen and I focused on planning our wedding, and I made sure she felt safe. But things didn't calm down as I had hoped. My mom, driven by anger and the need to regain control of the situation, started spreading lies about me and Jen on social media. She posted vague but obvious messages about ungrateful children and manipulative women tearing families apart, even hinting that Jen was the reason for the conflict between Mark and me. Soon, distant relatives and old friends started reaching out, questioning why I was being so cruel to my own mother without even knowing what really happened. My mom spread her version of the story, making it seem like I had kicked her out of my life and home over a small misunderstanding, and that Jen was manipulating my mind. At first, I tried to explain, but I realized many people had already made up their minds. The only thing we could do was move forward with our wedding plans and ignore the circus my mom had created. A month before the wedding, I got a call from my dad. He sounded nervous and hesitant, as if he was being forced to make the call. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he told me that my mom had hired a lawyer and was filing a lawsuit against me. She claimed I had assaulted her when I kicked her out of my house and was demanding compensation for the emotional damage I had supposedly caused. I was speechless. First, she invades my home, attacks my fiancé, and now she wants to sue me for reacting? I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He advised me not to contact her and let the case run its course. But deep down, the idea that my own mother could put me in such a humiliating position made me furious. It wasn't just about the money. It was the way she was willing to destroy everything to prove she was right, even if it meant trying to tarnish my reputation and my relationship with Jen. Jen tried to comfort me, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She was worried about what this meant for her future with me, and I feared that, at any moment, she might decide it wasn't worth facing all this drama. While I tried to protect Jen from the storm, my mom continued to worm her way into the lives of everyone we knew, trying to turn them against me. The court date arrived. I expected my mom to show up with her lawyer, ready to tear into me legally, but to my surprise, she brought Mark. He was called as a witness, and in court, he started fabricating stories about me, claiming I had always been aggressive toward him and that deep down, I'd always been jealous of my mom's favoritism. Mark lied shamelessly, saying I had a history of violence and that Jen had manipulated me to drive him away from the family. I knew it was a desperate attempt to regain control, but seeing my own brother lie so blatantly to ruin my life was hard to swallow. In the end, the judge dismissed most of their claims due to a lack of evidence and impartial witnesses. But that hardly mattered. Even if I came out victorious in court, my mom and Mark had managed to wear me down emotionally in ways I never imagined. I left there determined to cut them out of my life for good, as painful as it was. Jen and I finally got married in a simple ceremony with a few friends and my closest sister. The absence of my mom, dad, and Mark was a heavy weight, but I had no other choice. During the reception, I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I could feel the invisible presence of the conflicts that had brought us to this point. I wanted to focus on the life we were building together, but it was hard to ignore the emptiness my own family had left behind. 2 months after the wedding, I received a letter from my mother's lawyer. It was a notice that she was contesting the validity of my grandfather's will, which had left a small inheritance to me and my sisters. She claimed that, as my mother, she had a right to a larger portion and that I didn't deserve anything since, according to her, I had betrayed the family. I knew it wasn't about the money. It was about control. She wanted to show that she could still manipulate the circumstances and would never lose the final word. This time, I decided to take a different approach. I posted a long message on social media, sharing the entire story from the beginning. I talked about the favoritism, the emotional and physical abuse I endured growing up, Mark's lies, and the assault on Jen. I knew it would cause a stir, but I was ready to face the consequences. I received support from some friends and relatives who finally understood my side, but I also lost others who refused to believe it. My mother and Mark responded predictably. My mother called me ungrateful and accused me of destroying the family out of spite, while Mark simply disappeared from social media for a while. But to my surprise, my dad reached out a few days later. He was shaken and said he didn't know about everything my mom and Mark had been doing. He asked to meet, but I refused. I told him that, as much as I wanted to believe he was a victim of my mother, he had been complicit for years, and at that point, there was nothing more to say. In the end, my mother's fight over the will didn't go in her favor, and she couldn't take the portion my grandfather had left me. She lost everything and even had to cover the court costs. She continued to lash out at me, but her power was no longer the same. I knew she would always blame me and Jen for her own frustrations, but I was ready to move on. What remained of her was just a shadow of someone I once called mother, and though I felt a twinge of sadness, I had no regrets about keeping the door closed to her. Deep down, I knew I'd never be able to erase the scars this left on me, but at least by Jen's side, I was rebuilding a new life, far from the toxicity my own mother insisted on keeping alive. And while she and Mark continued to wallow in their own bitterness, I finally felt like I was beginning to find peace, even if it came at a high price. After finally cutting ties with my mom, Mark, and even my dad, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Jen and I decided it was time to focus on what truly mattered, our life together, away from all the toxicity my family had brought. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only way to protect ourselves and build something that wouldn't constantly be threatened by manipulation and drama. In the beginning, there were days when the silence felt deafening. There was always that strange feeling that something was missing, as if part of me had gotten used to the constant chaos. But Jen and I made a pact never to let those thoughts distract us from our path. Every time a relative tried to reach out or sent a message suggesting I should forgive and forget, I ignored it. My focus now was on my own future, and Jen was my partner on that journey. I threw myself into my work. I took on a new role at the company, which came with a raise and more responsibilities. What used to feel like just a job now became a passion, something I could shape and improve each day. It was an opportunity to finally feel valued for who I was, without having to deal with the expectations and pressures my mom had always placed on me. Jen was thriving too. She had started a new job, something she had always dreamed of, and our relationship was stronger than ever. Without my family's presence, there were no more arguments about past conflicts, no more emotional manipulation attempts from my mom or Mark's lies. For the first time, we could plan our future without feeling like something was holding us back. One of the first big steps we took together was buying a house. After months of searching, we found the perfect place in a quiet neighborhood, with a spacious garden where Jen already dreamed of planting flowers and creating a space to relax. The house needed some renovations, but that gave us a chance to work together on every detail, from painting to decorating each room. The process brought us even closer, and I felt that with every wall we painted and every piece of furniture we assembled, we were building a new chapter in our lives. Gradually, I realized that distancing myself from my family wasn't a loss, but a gain. The emptiness I once felt was replaced by new friendships and connections I made along the way. I befriended neighbors who became part of our routine, and Jen and I started hosting dinners at our home for our new friends. Our circle was small but genuine, and that was all that mattered. The sense of stability and peace that filled my life was something I had never experienced before. Over time, the memories of the conflicts with my mom and Mark became just distant recollections, shadows of a past that no longer had power over my present. Therapy also helped me deal with those feelings, to understand that what my mom didn't define my worth as a person, and that I had the right to move forward. A few years later, Jen and I decided we were ready for the next step, starting a family. Jen got pregnant, and I remember the day we got the news like it was yesterday. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. And unlike everything I feared, there was no doubt, no fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. I knew I had learned a lot and was ready to be a present and loving father, something I always wanted to be but had never seen in my own upbringing. When our son was born, it felt like all the pieces finally fell into place. Holding him in my arms for the first time brought a peace I never thought I would feel. It was a new beginning, a chance to create a loving and nurturing environment, something Jen and I were determined to do. Our focus shifted to our little family. We started creating new traditions, celebrating the small moments together. Jen and I would go to the park on Sundays, taking our son to play and run, and those moments, as simple as they were, became what I cherished most in life. I realized I didn't need a perfect family. I just needed a family that truly loved me, and I had found that with Jen and our son. At work, things were going well too. After a few years of dedication and growth, I was promoted again, this time to a leadership position. I began managing a team and had the chance to share what I had learned with the younger staff. It was as if I had finally arrived at the place I always wanted to be, but without having to sacrifice myself to get there. I was proud of what I had achieved and, even more, of having done it without giving in to the pressures and emotional blackmail of the past. There was a moment when our son was about 3 years old when I considered reaching out to my dad for one last conversation, an attempt to resolve things. But before I took any action, I remembered everything we had been through, all the times he sided with my mom while I bore the consequences. I decided I didn't need his approval anymore or his presence. My peace was finally more important than trying to fix something that couldn't be repaired. Years went by, and life settled into a good routine, full of little moments of happiness. Jen and I decided to start a small business together, a home decor and craft store she had always dreamed of opening. The business grew, and we found ourselves working side by side, turning our passion into a livelihood for our family. Seeing the smile on her face every day, alongside our son, who was growing up healthy and happy, was all I needed. Looking back now, I realized that cutting ties with my family was the hardest decision I ever made, but also the most important one. My mom and Mark went their separate ways, and I have no idea how they are doing now. I know that for many people, cutting ties with one's mother is something unforgivable. But I learned that my well-being and that of my family were more important than maintaining a facade of unity. My life became a reflection of the choices I made, and I wouldn't trade any of it. I learned to value the people who genuinely love me, and I found the strength to build a life away from the shadows of the past. Jen and I are ready for whatever the future holds, together, as a team. And for the first time in a long while, I can say that I am at peace.